of like community generated topics. I'm trying not to make it just a weekly podcast where it's like, right, 100 Thieves did this. What did TSM do? What did Cloud9 do? Like, there's a million shows out there like that, and they all, I mean, some of them do a good job, some of them are just whatever, aren't they? I'm trying to make it more like interesting topics, which some of them might tangentially be related to how a team's doing in the LCS, but otherwise, like, things that you can get your teeth into, as it were. So for this one, I've got some good ones. Crumbz is basically a very good guest for that. If people don't know, I mean, people will only know you from League of Legends, but it's a pretty well-read individual, has a lot of thoughts about the rest of the game. In fact, segue here, if you've ever checked it out, I know only sporadically you put them on Twitter, Crumbz, but you actually do pieces that are like sort of, some of them esports related, that are basically like think pieces, right?
Yeah, I've done a few, and that's honestly what I'm really, one of the things I'm really passionate about. But the thing is, I feel like I don't have as much liberty as someone like you has, in that you can just say whatever you want and there is not going to be that much fallout, because the shit I've got on the USB files, right? Like, this is what I'd really like to get out there, but I know for sure some of this stuff's just gonna get me crucified right away. So I have to spend all this time just trying to frame it so that it doesn't actually come back to haunt me in the first place. But yeah, a lot of think pieces. I like to just look at League through, I think, a lens that not a lot of people do.
Sure. And then our guest for this episode is going to be Oddball, who is someone who you probably would know if you've seen any of his historical pieces on Esports Heaven. And he also writes for Inven Global as well. Now, mainly with a historical bent is sort of the theme of these pieces, right, Oddball?
Yeah, I would say so. Just looking mostly at like the teams that I've admired in the past that I consider to be either underlooked or underappreciated in sort of aspects of why they are so great. I would say that that's mainly the thing that I try to bring out.
Indeed. So for this episode, I actually saw a perfect fucking topic. This is right up the alley of the sort of things, as I alluded to, I want to discuss on this show, which is there's a thread on Reddit where basically the LPL now, as you've seen with them partnering with Dom and with them doing a lot more stuff on Twitter, by the way, they're going really way more ham on socials. They're trying to get this English language fan base to come and watch the LPL. By the way, I'll even say quite a good timing of when to do that, and considering how badly like Korea's fallen down the last few years. Korea, aside from LS, doesn't really have the big draw in terms of the talent even. So if anything, there's sort of like, I would say, a little bit of an overlap there that you could maybe convince to come over the LPL, which is the better league and obviously has all these fantastic teams. So one of the things that was published in this was a video where basically it was about the training schedules that players have. Now, anyone who's seen any of the shows in the last couple of months that had Nelson, who obviously works with G2 now and formerly was a coach with LNG, he's basically said as much. It's just that fans, they have to be told things a million times before it sort of really sinks in. So the interesting thing to me basically was when you looked into it, these teams effectively were training like, I mean, roughly 12 hours a day. If you looked at how many hours, like the time span that they're training, basically you were just working all day. You were doing all sorts of crazy shit. Whereas if you went and looked at the LCS teams, they were doing significantly less. Like they were only doing a certain block of time period. A lot of the solo queue stuff's entirely optional. Like you don't do these multiple sessions. So let's just start there, right? Crumbz, obviously you used to be a pro yourself. You've worked in a bunch of different teams. You know the LCS teams. You heard some of the stories of the Koreans maybe back in the day. What are your initial thoughts on this? Is this what you would have expected?
Yeah, so this is already entirely expected, and there were some things in the LCS that I think are still true today. I have not confirmed with any team, so it might not be the case. But one thing that is worth noting is that LPL trains 7 days a week. So you obviously can't keep that schedule when you have competitive days, when you have to actually play on stage. So what a lot of these teams still do, though, is they scrim on days where they actually play.
Yes,
stage.
Nelson said they still play even on like the morning a scrim of the if they're going to play like an LPL match that night. Yeah,
and that is one thing that was very much rare when I was playing in the LCS, to scrim during the day, and the reason being, not that I agree with it, but this was the reason: you don't want to tilt your players. Like the players didn't want to get tilted. They didn't want to lose a scrim. It's like, oh, what happens if you lose the scrim block and then you're backfiring on your strategy, right? You have doubt on the things that you prepped. And so they tried to fix that by, well, let's just scrim only the academy teams. Like, let's have an easier scrim block right before. But then the question was, well, what if we lose to the academy team during that scrim block? Are we going to even kill the morale more? And so a lot of the teams had just abolished scrims during that day. And so the training days or the actual LCS days felt so empty because you spend all this day around a single match that could last 30 minutes. And then you go home and then you play solo queue. And it feels almost like a day off. It feels like your LCS day was a day off. So already I think that that's an area where the LCS teams could do much more if they wanted to practice during that day. And I honestly think it's just going to show. It's a cost that they're going to have to pay, and it's no surprise to people. I don't think it should be a surprise that the people that are performing at the best of the world are doing nothing else. This is in every single field ever, has always been the case. What do you think Michael Phelps is doing besides swimming and doing things about swimming? Nothing else, right? All of the best athletes around their craft are always doing something about their craft. And it's just what happens when you have such a giant field or such a giant pool of competitors. In high school, when you're competing against like 10 dudes in your grade, yeah, you probably don't have to push yourself that hard and you'll still be at the top. And then you can ride that for maybe even college, but you're not going to go global. And so this to me is not surprising. And I don't think you can change it. I think that trying to become sustainable, be like, oh, we're going to put these sustainable practices for people so that they can have a longer career. Guess what? Some dude's going to say, fuck that. I want to win right now. I'd rather give my health, my mental health, my physical health, all of it right now to win in the next 5 years. Let's go. They want to do that, and they probably end up achieving it. And it's their prerogative to do that. So I think that this is just something that North American players and just Western players in general, some do, but a lot are not really sensing that. And I'll tell you, on a personal level, this is something that I sensed in the first World Championship when I was watching SKT. I was in the stands playing for, I had already lost, right? It was finals. I'm watching SKT go up against RNG, and I see their first game, and I'm just looking at the demeanor of the players. I'm looking back to my own teammates, I'm Dignitas, and in that moment, I realized there is no way I can beat them. Like, unless I am willing to give up everything for playing and doing all I can, sacrifice everything to become the best at League, I am just not going to beat SKT. The best in the world are giving up everything. That's when I saw what it meant to be the best in the world. And that's when I realized I probably need to plan a way out of my career because I'm not going to sacrifice as much to get this far.
Right, Oddball, you can comment from any angle on this, mate. What are you thinking about this topic?
Well, I really appreciated the point that Crumbz brought up, just talking about how basically if you look at any other competitive discipline, it's the case where you're going to give it 100% and you're going to practice all the time. It doesn't matter based off of the morale angle that if you play a scrim before a game, you're going to, like, that's, if you lose the game, you're going to be unmotivated. Just looking at something like basketball, they have pre-game shoot-arounds. If a player misses a three-point shot, they're not going to be like, oh, well, I'm like completely lost for the rest of the game. Let's just not ever do that. Let's have it where we have absolutely no warm-up. I think that just from the perspective that you always want to obviously give it 100%. And to the point that people say, oh, well, someone's going to be burnt out. Someone's going to just be completely trashed if they try and give it 100%. I don't even think if you look at from LCK or LPL, the career lengths, I don't think it's really any much shorter in any significant amount compared to something like the LCS. So just from that perspective, I think that, and obviously it just comes from the case of satisfaction, like of being able to actually win. That's obviously an incredibly motivating factor and something that is going to want you to be able to continue to rise to the occasion and actually give it your all. So that's mainly my perspective on it.
The main problem I have with this whole topic goes like this. The reason why it's an issue is it's not that we're looking at this and going, wow, interesting. So how could we get it so that, like, you know, players in our region? No. The entire issue is always now going to be framed because of this whole thing where companies have to flex that they care about mental health. Clearly not true if you look at the actions of most of the companies. But because they have to flex that that's a thing in terms of optics, it's all framed as, right, how do we get the same results as the LPL, but without what they're doing in terms of, you know, that, which is like, listen, motherfucker, we didn't figure out with practicing all the time how to beat the LPL and LCK. Like, now you're asking for some absolute miracle worker level shit where I have to have my players play less and then beat their results. Like, that's some Gordian knot level shit. No one's got the solution on that one. So for me, the initial premise actually makes it less interesting. The hypothetical is one where it's like, right now there's no real solutions on board. Because I have to say, if you go and you ask people like Nelson or people from the LPL, they'll tell you the obvious answer, which is, well, at a minimum, you could start practicing as much. At least fucking do that. Like, to them, it's alien concept to them, by the way, that, like, we would expect to be able to have the same results with less. Like, they don't even get that as a premise. Because here's the problem. They're not burning out in the sense of, like, oh, like, because we want to win, we're going to do it. They happen in their cultures to do this anyway. It's not about whether you're the best. Like, the part that's probably the most misunderstood is the idea that, like, the guy who would consider doing this in the West, it's been done before, would be like when TSM had that lineup with Bjergsen and Doublelift, and they said that they were practicing all the time. Like, the best team will do it because they want to try and match the best Asian team. You're already at a disadvantage. The idea that you're the one now deciding if you can do it means it's too late. Like, that horse has already bolted from the stable. The guy who currently you've never heard of in LCK, he's in the worst team and he'll be one of the best players in a year from now. He's already practicing on that schedule today. And not because he's going to win LCK. He's not. He's not going to get past 10th. He's not going to go to Worlds. He's not doing any of this shit. They just already have it hard-coded into their culture at the moment. You work as hard as you can. And guess what? This is the fact that we don't have in the West. Because if you don't, you're out the door and I've got 50 guys can come in the door. If it's LPL, I've got 1,000 guys can come in the door. So there's another factor, by the way. They also don't have to care, Crumbz. This is why, this is a subtle point people might miss. One of the reasons, if I'm Team Liquid, I actually do slightly have to care whether the players get burned out, is because if the players that get burned out are Doublelift, Jensen, these are guys who actually have, like, incredible individual value that is not matched by other players in the league. If I lose Doublelift, the next best player, even if he's as good, loses all the marketing value, loses all the nostalgia element for the fans. If I lose Jensen, I might get Abadage, but he's not Jensen, doesn't have the Jensen track record, blah, blah, blah. So I actually, in some way, I have to keep these players happy. If I'm in the LPL and the equivalent of Jensen says, this is getting to me a bit, boss, I can't practice, then get the fuck out. I've got a guy in my LDL squad who actually, no joke, is probably as good as you. I just didn't play him in the team yet. Like that, I know it sounds harsh, but both aspects to me are why this is, like, basically, it's an interesting topic, but I don't think there's any solutions coming out of it. Like,
I think there was a solution offered, which I actually think is almost naive to think that this would actually fix the issue, which is that we want better ways to practice, right? So the solution was, well, if you gave us practice tool, we would practice more efficiently, and then we wouldn't have to put in that many hours. The people playing 16 hours a day are just going to play 16 hours of practice tool, right? They're still going to put in more hours of whatever practice method is available. So it actually doesn't matter. And I think it's super obvious when you just boil it down to what you prioritize as a person, and you just map out your life and, like, all right, I want to play League. I need to eat food. I need to do all these things. I need to put more time because time is the only thing that I can use to get better at League, right? I just need more time. Where can I cut this away from? Cut it off from every other aspect of my life. And I think that a player like Caps was actually, at some point, I don't know now, was similar to that. I remember hearing stories that he didn't even have a cell phone. Right, to me, that's very impressive. Like, the guy didn't have a cell phone and still just playing League, like, just everything having to do with League. Guess what? Best Western player, right? Maybe contestable with perks, but at the very least is right there in that conversation. He gave it all, right? He put everything on the line. You have somebody like Double was just playing League more than anything else, not really doing anything else. Same thing with a player like Perks. The ones that have been the very best in the West have also sacrificed a lot. So it's really not a surprise. It's just that the percentage of people doing it here is so much lower.
I
From
also
what
think,
you've-
dude, like one thing I'll just throw in quickly is this, right? Which is I don't think people are really thinking about because here's the problem. To solve the issue, not only like you're saying, because you do have to pump up the productivity on our end, like the efficiency as it were, because the only way you could use the same amount of time and get more results. But the other part people aren't thinking about is this. Even if you do all that, what stops the LPL still as being the best? That's the problem. You'll almost have to go and look it up. Harrison Berger on this motherfucker. You'd have to actually literally mandate that Koreans and Chinese aren't allowed to practice beyond a set amount of hours. That's the only way I can see to fix it. Because put it this way, as you pointed out, it's not just League of Legends, it's not just esports. Any field, by the way, that tends to be about extreme concepts, like you must have incredible success and make lots of money, people will always say, well, I'm willing to trade absolutely everything for that because I'm just a raw materialist. So the stock market, traditional sports, combat sports, people will cut every corner they can to get the short-term win. Now, it's true in the long term, you want to be like, but that'll shorten your career length and all, blah, 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 blah. Like, maybe, but the point is the guy isn't doing it thinking 8 years from down the line. He's trying to think, how good can I be in a month from now? And unfortunately, if that's the battle you're involved in, I mean, like you're saying, good luck, like revolutionising how practice exists just so you can get as good. What were you going to say, Oddball?
I was just going to ask, just from what you've observed, Crumbz, when players come over, like players from South Korea or from China, when they come to NA, do you think that for the most part, their practice regimen is lowered, that they kind of absorb the NA mentality once they come over?
If they've given up, if they've given up. If not, though, I think they'll keep trying. I think Core JJ was an example of a player that hadn't given up, that was pushing the rest of the team to play much more, right? When you ask, what other games do you play? No. Right, it's just League, but there's no other games to play. Like, if Faker plays other games, it's because he's in a queue time, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to be playing some WoW. I've got some hours to kill. I'm going to play WoW. No, it's playing League all the time. So I think that the practice regimen of foreign players drops only if they have accepted that they have lost, that it's doomed, that there's no way out. And I think that for the most part, they increase the practice regimen. Now, I do think that a lot of players initially, though, played a ton, but as it comes and goes with maybe the scrim schedule, now they're burnt out in scrims a little bit, it starts to drop. And I think that's the largest area where the discrepancies lie. It's not so much about grinding solo queue, it's grinding scrims with solo queue in the practice environment and being consistent at it. Because a lot of these players, they can go 16 hours a day. A lot of LCS players, no problem, can keep up the LPL schedule. Can they do it for a month, though, and still be feeling good about their game? That's more unlikely.
Basically, one of the things that has fucked... It's actually the dark secret by why so many Korean players who came to the LCS just drop off after 6 months or a year, is either they literally just practice and are like Crumbz says, I give up. Like, this is just shit practice. No one else is trying. You know, since my teammates aren't trying, why? But like, by the way, teammates is probably the biggest one that crushes these guys. They just mentally break. Yeah. What they do is they sit there. They've just played a whole week of LCS games. Let's say like they went 1-2, right? To a Korean, by the way, to not go 3-3, you failed already. So you must go and do your work to justify your pay. Because remember, you're used to a world where it's a world of scarcity. Like to you, there's only 10 jobs in the whole scene. Meanwhile, it's abundance to your employer. He has thousands of people he could employ. So you always have to keep in his mind, like, I'm doing everything I can for this spot. Even if, by the way, you're a star player. And then on top of that, the first few months you do that. You keep trying, you keep doing extra solo queue after scrims, but eventually you just get sick of looking in the practice facility and seeing nobody else there, or one guy watching anime eating some fucking fast food or something, and you're thinking like, I'm giving up my fucking life. I live in a foreign country where I don't even speak the language. I'm practicing all day long. I'm trying and grinding in this shit solo queue, and then the other guys just don't even do it. Like, they just turn up, they scream a little bit. I have one guy who's stuck in Diamond. He's my teammate and he gets paid $200,000 a year. Like, dude, some of them just mentally break. Like, they can't process the idea. Like, because think about it, right? In that scenario, here's the best analogy ever. It's like being in the fucking college project where you're the one who ends up having to do all the work, but the others all get to have credit because it's a group project. Everyone knows that's the most depressing feeling in the world. You even start to think evil thoughts like, maybe I should intentionally fail the project so they don't get a fucking good grade. Like, you start to actually hate your own teammates because they're just not contributing. So a lot of them basically can't handle that. Like, it's That's one of the other reasons why they say that whole thing of like get more than one Korean. It's not just to like hang out with me. It's because then at least there's one other fucker who's like got the same mentality. He's still trying. They can duo with each other. Like it's dark, but it's a reality. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of players just lose their shit in the West.
I think the solution for the West would just be you actually probably need to adopt the same schedule, the same regiment, but just use the money that you have. And it's not like the LPL isn't doing this already. Just have actual nutrition, right? Prioritize the nutrition, prioritize exercise for the players. That's mandatory, right? And mandatory like stretching so that they don't get carpal tunnel, like all these things. Like if you need to have the players take a 2-minute break in between solo queue games so that they stretch their hands, recalibrate their eyes, these kinds of things, just do it. But then you've done what you can to alleviate the physical damage that they will inevitably suffer from this, but you will at least set them up to be able to work the same amount and probably last a little bit longer than if they didn't have that. So I think you have to put in that same amount of time, but you can use the resources that we have here to provide for the aspects that are gonna still contribute severely to performance.
And even then, with all of that considered, I would still argue that just Chinese, and I think everybody would agree that Chinese and Korean practice in general is more efficient and better practice in general. They have a way more competitive solo queue that obviously allows them to hone their mechanics a lot more. And obviously they have way more teams. They have about 12 elite teams that they can always scrim against. So I agree with both of you that it is a problem that there's really not any good solution at the moment for.
Right,
if you don't play solo queue, get VODs. Watch some VODs. That's what I'll say. Watch some VODs.
Actually, I'll do one last little rant, basically, because it's one that's actually from so long ago now on Some Insight. People won't even know this in the modern day. They'll have only watched like the last few years. Basically, I actually explained this way back in time. I think it was the episode that we had Soaz on, maybe. It was one from like 2015 or something in Some Insight. Basically, I had this analogy where I explained to people why you will never, ever actually be able to compete with the mentality, the work ethic of the best Koreans. I'll even add in a fresh anecdote that I might not have told. So basically, way back in the day in Counter-Strike in like 2009, I went to China to go to an event where they were first doing big events in Asia. And when I was there in China, I mean not the biggest cities in China, but like a decently medium-sized one. I was walking down like the main high street, which by the way, at the time already it was quite developed. It looked like it could have been like, like a Western city or something, I will say if you move beyond the high street, every street, my joke was, you were going back in time a decade, every street you went into the sort of suburb area. But okay, if you're on Main Street, it looks legit, it looks like, it could be anywhere. It could be anywhere in the world, right? I saw some people, Crumbz, fixing a street light. And this is how they were fixing it. One of them was stood with a ladder balanced on his shoulders, and another man was on the top of the ladder fixing the streetlight. And the first thing I thought in that moment, Crumbz, was this is why the West has zero chance against China in any sort of a level playing field when it comes to basic tasks that like a human can carry out. Because in my country, the United Kingdom, right, that would immediately be like against about 50 laws called health and safety. Like you need like that obviously like the fucking ladder would have to be on the floor. There'd have to be two people on either side holding the ladder. The ladder would have to have regulation fucking rubber grips. You'd have to have some sort of license to do that work. And basically the amount of red tape and extra people and extra money you'd have to spend means that whoever was getting this light fixed has already beaten any possible Western country. Like you just logistically can't do what they can do. So similarly, right, I made an analogy like this. I think this is why I did it on the episode of if Soaz was indeed on this episode. Because if you remember, famously, Soaz got mega flamed when they had All Stars 2014, which is really like the precursor to MSI. Famously, Fnatic didn't bother practicing and just turned up and got completely rocked by like SK Telecom, right? And what people forget about this story is Soaz doesn't give a fuck. So he just openly said, like, well, of course we didn't practice. We haven't had any time off in ages. Like, think about it. Like we played all the EULCS splits last year. Then we went to Worlds. Then, if you remember back then, they used to have other tournaments like the Battle of the Atlantic and IEM Cologne. We had all these off-season tournaments. Then we came in. Then we've won the split, and now we're going to this tournament. And now you want us to practice for this extra tournament, an all-star tournament. So his whole perspective was like, I have to have some time off, right? That's a champion. That's one of the most decorated Western champions ever. And what he was trying to tell you was essentially the difference in culture between the two regions. So I'll do it very quickly. If you are a Westerner, The dream of esports is this. Yeah, I want to be one of the best. Yeah, I'd like to win if I could. These are really nice things. But after that, I want the reward. And the reward is this: life freedom. I get to have a holiday when I want to in the best place in the world. I get to take my girlfriend and buy her expensive things. I get to live in, essentially, if it's a sports stream, the mansion. I get to have the Lamborghini. I get to chill out. In my off season, I get to fucking have fun. Now, here's the difference, right? If you're Faker, or pick like a fucking probably a Japanese gymnast or something, a similar kind of scenario, I imagine. If you're Faker, right, same scenario, you're the best. So you've just won LCK and then you went and you won Worlds. Good news, you won, so you got to stay on top. You better practice the hardest out of everyone. Let's say you have a slump though, Crumbz. In the spring split, you don't do that well, you come 7th. You better practice as hard as you can. You're in 7th, you got to get back to 1st. The joke is you never get time off. There will never, ever, ever, ever be time off. You could win every tournament as like effectively Faker did out of what you can win in League. And you still don't get to have the time off. The reward that the Westerner thinks is coming is never coming. And here's the bad news for you guys. The guy who's the Westerner is competing against Faker. That's why he's fucked. Do you see it? Because when he gets what he wants as his dream, it includes having time off that Faker doesn't ever imagine he's going to have. Or, by the way, even want to have. There's the most fucked up element of it all. In his culture, Faker would even think it would be like relinquishing his duty to take, you know, a week or 2 weeks off in the summer. So I won't say it's like impossible we can improve in the West, but like, there's no catching up. Like there's these areas, the delta between us and them it's for a good reason. And I would even say this, it's dark, but I don't even know that you'd want to. Like, I don't think you wouldn't want, put it this way, if the worst thing you could ever do as a Westerner is get the cursed monkey paw and go, I wish we practice as much as the LPR. Mate, you'll be dead in a year. Like, it'd get dark. It'd get really dark, I'm telling you.
You know, I think the epitome of that mindset that I remember seeing from the LCK was when, this must have been maybe 2014 or 2015 OGN champions, when SKT, I think, swept 3-0. They're celebrating on stage, and Piglet is weeping because he thought he didn't play well, right? Yes. They crushed. He shat on the other enemy team. But he's weeping more than as if he lost because he thought he didn't play well. I have never seen that before. And on a side note, I think it would be for another podcast, but the over-regulation of the Western world is definitely a very interesting topic.
Oh, for sure it is. I mean, say the A/B test, but I don't even know that Riot's actually that advanced. They just change them, make them slightly different and see what's what, right? And basically, one of the changes they made in LCS from last year, which I have to say I'm not a huge fan of, it reminds me of when the LCS began and you were back as a pro player, Crumbz. Remember when the first NALCS was 8 teams and the top 6 made the playoffs? Hence why, as you referenced on the last episode, there was that bizarre scenario where if you make the playoffs but you lose the first game, you can get relegated from the league, which sounds so bizarre. On the one hand, you're 6th, so you're not that good, but you're in the playoffs and can win the league. And if you lose the first match, you can potentially be in relegation to be eliminated from the league. Well, they've almost made it as ridiculous. Like, obviously, there's no relegation anymore because it's franchising. But now, in the 10-team LCS, 8 teams make the playoffs, and obviously they kind of do it like TI style, where if you make it from the last spots, you just make the worst possible one where you go in the lower bracket instead of starting in the upper bracket with the other teams. It's a bit like if people know the classic TI format for the playoffs of that tournament. So the issue here obviously is, it's very rare that teams 7 and 8 are actually good and are actually going to do anything in the playoffs, right? So what do you think, even as a format concept here, right, Crumbz? Where are you coming down on this?
I mean, the first thing that just pains me is to see that one of the teams can make playoffs with a record that's like, 14 and 34? Or it's 14 and... Yeah, like Golden Gardens right now is 12 and 30. They could make it at 15 and 30. That is ridiculous to me. That this is something that I think is rewarded. And so from a purely competitive standpoint, to me, this does not make sense. Now, from the standpoint of... By the way,
for context, I believe there was famously a split, I think it was in Season 8, where Optic didn't make the playoffs, even though they had an 8-8 record, a 50% win rate. Whereas, as you're saying, like, in this scenario, you could have like a 33% win rate and make the playoffs.
Yeah. And then I think from a standpoint of increasing viewership, this makes a lot of sense because best ofs, I think, definitely get people more interested. And then playoffs, just the fact that it's labeled playoffs, I think gets people more interested in it. And then if you're a bottom team, this gives you some leeway into not having to play so well, and you still get that extra viewership that goes so well because it couples into the narratives that get deployed during a playoff series. So I think it makes sense for viewership wise, but I don't think this is a sustainable thing, because then once you're used to this format, next season rolls around and you don't give a shit about regular season. You'll just wait for playoffs because you know that 8 out of 10 will make it. And you know that because the win rates are so low of the bottom teams, the ones that don't make it must be so much worse at that point because their win rates are abysmal. You're like, I don't even care if I don't watch them. I know they're not going to make it to playoffs. So I think that this is a fine experiment to say that we did it and that we know how 8 out of 10 making it into playoffs works out. But I don't think this is a good idea in the future, just because it's going to get redundant real quick, and it's going to eventually suck the value out of the regular season in favor of a playoff series. And the stance is, oh, but it'll be cool, right? If the bottom team makes a miracle run, right? You want to see the miracle run. Maybe Dignitas makes a miracle run, but that's the whole point of regular season. You don't get to make a miracle run because you sucked most of the year, right? If you just allow everybody to compete, then sure, put in a why don't we allow every year an amateur team to participate from academy, see if they make a miracle run in the LCS. Wouldn't that be hype? That'd be a very hype narrative storyline if we just let number 1 of academy into the LCS playoffs and see how they do. Hey, worst case scenario, they fail. Everyone expected it. Best case scenario, they make a miracle run. I don't like that argument.
What do you think, Oddball?
I mean, obviously, from a viewership perspective, it would be exciting to see a team like Golden Guardians be able to, they made like an incredible upset. But for the most part, it's going to just be depressing again. You're just going to have a top team 3-0 them. All the players are going to look sad, and then you wrap up to the next broadcast. So for the most part, I would say that it's just a waste of time, and it overall just like devalues the competition of the league.
Yeah, my problem is, like, I also think the knock-on effects specifically for the LCS and the NA region could be really bad. Like, as you alluded to, Crumbz, this is also part of why some of the teams, yes, including the format where it carries over from spring, so the teams that already were top 3, for example, know you'd have to really, really do the season wrong to not make playoffs, for example. So they already know they're in with a shout to get their Worlds qualification. They just have to basically get this shit together in the last 2 weeks. I think that's terrible for the competition of the league, because what it implies is you can take games off. You can, by the way, I don't think this is a coincidence, bench a whole bunch of star players and know that as long as I've resolved it within about 3 or 4 weeks, this is fine. I can get the train back on the track. That wouldn't be the case, because in the era I was describing when they had relegation, Crumbz, that's the whole reason back then why people were scared to try rookie talent, because you needed to win every single game, because you never know at the end of the split, like, what, for all you know, the team below you, they get their shit together and they do a little playoff run, and all of a sudden you're in the relegation spot. It's like, fuck. So you mean that one game that I lost in week 3, that was a 50-50 Baron, maybe I shouldn't have lost it. Like, that back then you couldn't do that. So unfortunately, even though within most of these formats, they tend to build in reasons why, like, a sane person would still try. Like, for example, you want to be a top 4 team, so you get the upper bracket, right? There's one great reason to keep trying for a spot. Even technically, you don't just want to be any top 4 team. You don't want to be number 4, because then you play number 1. Number 1 in theory should be the best. The problem is this: if everyone fucks around, and number 1 in the league fucks around, and number 2 in the league fucks around, number 3 in the league fucks around, they all think we just need to be top 4, you now can all fuck around. You've sort of made an arms race where you agree not to go that hard, everyone. So I think, unfortunately, it can backfire, and it might actually, like, tank some of the quality of, like, the weekly aspect of LCS. Because what you're basically saying is this regular split doesn't matter unless you're the worst 2 teams. Otherwise, just enjoy the playoffs. And I even think, quite frankly, as much as people will say that angle, Oddball, of like, but imagine if, like, the worst team made a run, I think that would be the worst thing that could ever happen to the competition of the league. Like, imagine being a top team that as a fluke lost a one-off game like this against some nobody squad. Like, what message do you take from that? Like, you already won one of the best teams. Like, what are you supposed to do differently? Nothing. Like, you just have to hope you don't get unlucky, basically. And also, like, it's just so rare that it would happen in League of Legends, I'm afraid. Like, I don't think people realise, if you're so bad, like some of the teams here are, who are in, like, 3rd from bottom, you're not winning best of 5s against anyone. Like, a best of 5 is the last thing you can even be thinking about. Right, let's switch it up, because I've got a different topic we can go with. Did you have more, Crumbz?
No, go ahead.
I thought another one we could go with, because this is an interesting one. We're going to make this one, it won't just even be LCS specific, because this is an abstract concept we can talk about. This is interesting, because I feel like every league in the world should be saying this, but LCK is the first one to say it. Everyone except the LPL, in my opinion, has the problem I'm about to describe. The LCK says, there's a sentiment from people within their league that they don't have enough, air quotes, smart players in the current era of mechanics, as they say, air quotes, and that they've started literally looking for retired veterans to potentially come back, Crumbz. Now, the reason I bring this up is, this will sound very shocking, because obviously it's like LCK isn't in the best sport, and like, wow, is that it? They're having to go back and get like old people. But as I say, for me, almost everyone except LPL, this is a problem I see in all the regions, mate, is that everyone's gone heavy on rookies, and they've forgotten what skills like veterans bring, and instead we just got all these teams full of rookie talents, and you don't know which are going to fail at Worlds, which are going to be good in the playoffs, which are going to be good in a week from now. You just know that they were good a month ago when they were in the ARL, or a year ago when they were somewhere else, or they were hot this month. Basically, everything's flavour of the month. So, do you want to start us off, Crumbz? What do you think of this as either an abstract point or LCK specific? Up to you.
I mean, the first thing, I'll go with the abstract. I don't think it's LCK specific for me. The fact that a player like Xmithy, despite the work ethic complaints, had not even academy offers, it isn't even on any team. I mean, this guy has won more than any other jungler in NA, right? He actually was able to perform even internationally. Yes. There should have been a lot of interest in getting Xmithy, whether he wanted to or not. I know he's still lingering around with people from the scene, so I think that it was surprising, and I actually think that this is a problem that is not confined to just the player base. I think it's actually confined to the entire space, in that you're running out of talent for coaches as well. You're running out of talent for managers. You're running out of talent for pretty much all the aspects that you require some pretty important first-hand experience from playing or being around League. And I think it applies to every aspect of League, because right now the coaches just continue to get recycled. Right, the players are just gotta find somebody new, and then these players don't have the leadership qualities. They're 18 years old, they're 17 years old. Where are the guys that are in their mid to late 20s that are able to bring up all these other young players? Core JJ is about to be 30, right? Afram was about to be 30. There's a reason why these players are better at bringing up young talent than if you pair them up with a new support. So I think this is just an oversight from leagues in general, that they have not valued having old voices, that they just thought that old voices would have nothing to offer if maybe their mechanics were not there. Right? If you didn't have the mechanics, you had no other qualities that were redeemable in League. If you weren't able to express the way you needed somebody to play, or how you wanted them to view the game well, and you didn't have the mechanics, and you had no value whatsoever, that there was no intangibles when it came to leadership. And I think that was an oversight that is slowly creeping up. I think that right now a lot of teams are going to be taking a hard look at their staff. They're going to start realizing that a lot of their problems weren't entirely on the players, and a lot of it was on their staff, and that they are going to have to find staff that can understand the players, that knows what it means to be a pro, that knows the needs of an organization. And then they're going to realize that, oh, the best I can do is hire some dude that watched collegiate esports for a year, for 1 year, and that's all he's done. And that's really going to hurt. I think it's really going to end up hurting the scene. And if the LCK was the first one to come out and say it, I think that's already the problem, because I thought NA would be the first one to realize this.
What do you think, Oddball?
Yeah, the way that I think about it, I think that it depends on the region that you're talking about, because I think that while it is something similar in both Korea and North America, as well as Europe, it is more of the fact that it's the same problem, but I think that the cause of the problem is different in some respects. When you look at like North America and LEC, when I talked with I actually talked a little bit about with Amazing about this subject. Something that he said was just that when you have players that do have leadership qualities, obviously there are some examples like Aframu who are just like the sweetest people that are also able to exhibit those qualities, but there are people that are like Alfari and Amazing that could in some cases be considered conflicting with team managements and with team staffs. So I think that that's one of the reasons that you see that in the Western League of Legends is just based off of franchising and just based off the business model, that those type of people are not necessarily the most agreeable and the type of figures that teams want to have, but that they need to have. Yep. And when you look at Korea, I would say that for the most part, I think it's just a matter of players getting burnt out. The fact that like there are cases where they are just like completely destroyed after a few years, and you don't really have that many experienced players, able to continue playing. That's the way I see it, at least.
I mean, they don't know how to value these people, though. I think what you said is right. You need those old players, but then someone's getting butthurt because the person that you need keeps telling you that you're shit and that you don't know what you're talking about and that you need to stay away from talking to the players about League because you keep putting bad ideas in their head. And then, oh, no, you can't have this guy. He's toxic. He's telling me all these negative things. It's like, well, nobody else can do this job right now, right? Nobody else can talk to these players in the way that they need to. And so I think that there is a big problem in not recognizing that sometimes the value that the player or the person is offering to the organization is just much higher than what anybody else can bring to the table. And you're just going to have to deal with that. And honestly, it's not that hard. Right, just stay away. Just stay out of the guy's way and give him the leash and be like, okay, you think you can run this team? You've been a player for a long time. It's clear that a lot of the people that are running some of the best orgs have a lot of experience as a player before, or in some intertwined capacity within professional esports. And until these people get fostered, it's going to be the same result that happens with the large developers, that instead of hiring the people that were really passionate about the game in the first place, you hired somebody that came off of a degree or some other position that sees this position as a way to further their resume or as a way to make some money in a cool industry to advance their career, and is not going to give a shit, is going to have 1 to 3 years making 6 figures plus, and then will just bounce and never be heard of again. So you need to keep hiring the people that have already devoted their lives to it, because they will continue to do so.
Yeah, one of the problems I have with this topic is basically it sounds like you're telling coaches and orgs one thing for 5 years and then you go, whoa, don't do what I just said. So people are going to think, but you always advocate for coaches to have more control, for example, and more agency over what they can run in the team. Yeah, but the problem I have is this. Most of the people who are coaches are so inexperienced at that job, because at most they could only have done it for about 4 or 5 years if they're lucky, that they themselves aren't actually good enough at coaching to warrant full control of a team. Now, I want them to have more control. Like, it's ridiculous, some of the stories I've heard over the years of people who basically only got to sort of half do the draft, but they got the blame for everything else in the team. They didn't recruit the players, they didn't choose which player got to stay, sometimes they were overruled over who they put in the game, and then the player on top of that's fucking up their draft, telling them I can't play the champion I was playing all week, or I don't want to play against this of this opponent's one pick, you know. So even though I want them to have more agency, the issue I have is this. I feel like some teams and orgs have skipped over the period of giving them no agency and given them all the agency, and the victim are these exact players. Because here's the dark truth if you're a team org owner. The players win the games, not the coaches. There's no coach in the entire West is so genius, he's making his team like 50% better just by coaching them. They, at the moment, if they do an amazing job at adding the last 10%, that's what they're doing as a coach, right? So my problem is this. The person who really makes your macro amazing is someone like Mithy or Perks or fucking insert other names of people who've done these jobs. Matter, Swordart, if he isn't in TSM in 2021. These are the players who are doing that for you. It isn't your coach. Your coach, this is the problem. The coach doesn't understand. Yes, for the rookie and for the player who's just a player, maybe he should have full agency. But if you have someone like a Mithy or an Amazing in your team and you don't want to listen to them, you have fucking failed your job, mate. You are stupid as fuck. That would be like being a basketball coach and then you have like fucking Chris Paul, fucking Steve Nash as your point guard, and you're like, oh, you won't making any pass decisions, so you're just going to run in my system, and I'm going to call all the players from the side of the court. You wouldn't do that, because why have you got that player in that case? And those are even good examples, by the way, because everyone knows point guard doesn't have to be that good individually at the end of his career. He just has to know the game. He has to know how to help other people be better. So most of the people we're talking about, these names, are people who not only are smart as fuck about the game from a player position, by the way, that instantly gets buy-in from your teammates that a coach doesn't get, but more importantly, most of them are captain figures as well. Like, here's what I think the LCK is also learning. They're learning, just like the LEC is over in Europe, where they have all those ERL rookies, is that you want a couple of rookies. Like, for example, maybe if my mid laner is like some stud fucking assassin player, yeah, maybe I want him as a rookie. I don't want my jungle and support to both be rookies who never played at the pro level, have zero international experience, and might be working with players that are more senior than. What are the odds they're going to be amazing shot callers, amazing captain figures? Because I think a lot of the aspects about the game, like, that go missing are just people who do things that don't show up on the scoreboard. I'll give you an obvious example. Dude, I've seen this in fucking Cloud9. Are you ready? I'm going to be the one person who's going to make an angle whereby Perks has been inarguably a positive to Cloud9. I'll give you an example, right? When Cloud9 won those games against the international teams, did they win those by smashing the game and just being better and all? Did they fuck? What they actually have in Cloud9 now that I don't think any NA teams had ever, I think, is they actually have someone who understands quick macro decision making. And you see it. Think of the game everyone remembers watching on this last weekend. TSM versus Cloud9, a massive fiesta, right? In that game, every time TSM makes a good move, Cloud9 instantly on the other side of that make a play. They go for a tower dive. They go for like a group up and do something else. They're taking the Herald, right? We better take the Dragon now. Like, they instantly respond. That is a classic hallmark of all Perks teams, by the way. And then here's the other one. Y'all are all going to laugh and go, yeah, what about that stupid TP? That TP made perfect fucking sense. What are you talking about? If that inhibitor doesn't respawn and they don't just dive after the fucking TP, that's a genius move that has no downside. You either end the game instantly, which is what they went for. I love decision making like that, where you're just willing to go for it. And if they don't, all they had to do was back out and not die, and they still were fine. It's just back to like almost like a slightly even game with them ahead, if anything. So, in my opinion, like, you can see the impact he's having. He might be not very good individually right now, but that is impact that is impacting the game beyond just a mid laner, isn't it? Like, there's plenty of mid laners might have played better, but they wouldn't make any of those calls, and they all just happen to follow him in every team he's in. They make these clutch mid-game macro decisions. Do they fuck? That comes from the guy who's doing that. Oh, and who's one of his coaches? Oh, it's also Mithy, who's another fucking wizard at the game who knows all this shit. So I'm not surprised that the regions, by the way, that have all the players, think about it, Korea and China, the reason they're going to come to this conclusion is because they have 1 billion raw mechanical talents, so they can't just be that the player isn't good enough. I'll even say, by the way, this is why the sword art move kills me in LCS, because I actually think Sword Art did this in LPL. He took his team to like a top placing in the LPL and then went to the final of Worlds. The problem is this, he's not a super English speaker, is he? So he's not going to be as good in English. So in my opinion, the main reason to hire him was that aspect, but you can't make use of it in the same way. If he's speaking fucking Mandarin, I'm sure he's amazing. I bet it's incredible the download he can give his teammates. So I'm amazed more regions haven't started to pick up on this. Like, I predict, Crumbz, in the next few years, you will start to see, the obvious examples like Nuke Duck on Excel, you'll start to see some of the GMs make these sort of shrewd like reclamations of players that we thought were done, but they're going to come back and be like, you know, LEC quality. They might not be the best, but they'll be quality, you know. And the idea is, what you'll eventually do, in my opinion, is the analogy. It'll be like Academy in LCS. You don't want it to be all rookies, and you're stupid if it's all washed Season 2 players. You want it to be a mix, so that the veterans help develop the rookies and establish the basic playing style that they can then understand sort of what LCS is like. And then when they go to LCS, it's not the brand new scenario where they're just walking into a totally new game. They sort of played like, you know, something half like the LCS, if you get my point. Anyone having thoughts off this?
It doesn't surprise me. I think that a lot of players didn't stop playing because they wanted to. I think they stopped playing because the opportunities that the orgs were after, it felt like they didn't align with what the players wanted. Like,
yes.
I think a
this
player
is basically why
that
Featherman just retired, by the way. Featherman just retired for the same reason. Right. He said he knew he wasn't going to get back into LEC, so what was the point, basically?
Yeah, like, you've got Featherman, you've got a player like Freeze. I didn't think Freeze, I think, was looking for playing. Right? He's now coaching. So I think there's a lot of players that are in this position. I think even... I mean, who knows? Like, this might be too far, but maybe Golden Glue, if you give him more years, could have actually kept playing in amateur and academy and then made it to pro. Like, Who knows? Like, right, we still don't know what the actual span of a league career looks like. So I think that a lot of players did go out early because I tell you, had I received an offer to any league after Renegades got banned, I would have kept playing. I would have not stopped. I stopped because there were no more offers.
I'll give you the most egregious one. It's only now allowed to be made public because enough people have made it public, like who were legit, not me, just as a brand safe. Basically, Mithy didn't choose to retire. He didn't choose to become the coach of Fnatic. What happened was, when everyone else in the OG team wanted to re-up and just do it again, they only offered him from the org the minimum possible salary, essentially. And he was just like, fuck this noise, I'm out. So he just left. And so he was essentially forced into retirement because the team he wanted to play for just wouldn't give him a good deal. And that guy was one of the smartest players. No joke, as in like, no one gets better rave reviews from their former teammates than people like him. Like, he gets like the 10 out of 10 work review. Like, the guy is a genius and taught me everything about the game. That's like a bunch of people who've played with him. So the idea an org looks at that and goes, I think you're worth about the minimum possible salary. Like, this game over there, isn't it? Like, these people are in a different world than us.
It's really sad. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Unless a player, I think, is like just like one of the top in their position, it seems like for the most part there is just like a high devaluing of just knowledge, because organizations will just look at a rookie player and just say, oh, this person could be the best player in the league in a year or two. Like there's a chance. With a smart player, you can't really, like an experienced player, you can't really say that as much. You know for the most part what you get, but they just so highly undervalue what they bring, like in terms of intangibles. It's really sad to see, I would say.
That's what I think is not true, though. I do think that a player can actually get better over time. I think that a player, even as they age, can legitimately improve their mechanics. I think that using softwares that actually are improving softwares, things for mechanics, can actually pair well with better review, better decision making, and better decision making should put you in positions where you need to rely on your mechanics less, so you end up looking better. And I mean, even players like Core and Afro, some of the oldest in the world, have some of the best mechanics of support still, right? So I don't think that there is such a strong argument for mechanics immediately hurting, at least in the support role. I think that a lot of these players can also fall back into roles that require less mechanics, like support, like jungle sometimes. So I think there is an avenue for you to role swap into these roles. And I think Riot could actually promote the longevity of the game by creating more champions around these roles that are less mechanically demanding, while the other carry roles are much more. It kind of is like that already, but if you did it a little bit more, I think it would help the longevity of the game.
Like, my analogy I would give basically is like a very famous thing I've heard about the chess world, which is that the gimmick in chess is you just obsessively study all the new openings, because obviously if you get some gimmick opening no one knows, you get a header piece or a position and it feels like it's like starting the game in League like 2-0 up in there, like, oh fuck, this is what I've been waiting for, now I'm going to carry the game. But the problem is this, just as you can imagine that scenario, it doesn't really matter if you get ahead of me if you don't understand how the end game of chess works, that you aren't going to win the game, you're going to be lost when you get to the most important part of the game. So my analogy would be picking up a player who's never really played much professional league. He just happens to be amazing today on like Akali as a mid laner. That's like being the guy obsessing over the opening. What you're saying is, oh, he's going to do straight firing fucking in the lane. It's like, yeah, what about when you have to like group, when you have to rotate? What about if he has to split push and make the perfect decision on when to pull off or when to continue going and apply pressure? Like, he's basically going to have, he's going to score very highly on like the gimmick aspect I just said there. He's going to score very low on the other areas. And so the problem is, think about the way League works. There's certain roles you do have to be among the best. If you want to be in Team Liquid and you want to be a top laner, for example, you better be really fucking good at the game. Like, they're not going to take someone who's bad but just has some game knowledge. But as we all know, Smithy's the best example ever, Crumbz, because if people don't know, he was phoning it in some of the years where he was winning the LCS. But I tell you what, that guy's understanding, if I pause the game, and I use the same analogy, if I pause the game 33 minutes in and I say to Smithy, what do you think is going to happen and what do you do? He is a chess master in this equivalent. Like, he understands, he's played 1 billion games. So I don't care that the other jungler has crazy mechanics. Like, I'll put my money on Smithy in that scenario, and the value he would bring to the team, I mean, you just go look at the fucking results. Like the eye test tells you everything. How many of his teams were incredible late game teams? How many of his teams know how to play around objectives in a tight game? Give me a break. Like this guy, it's like I always say it, so it's overvalued, but the guy has actually forgotten more about League than most of the rookies will ever know. Like that's the disparity we're talking about here. And the fact, by the way, that careers are so short mean that actually if you're like a 5 or 6 year veteran, you are incredibly experienced. You are incredibly experienced. There's a reason why in pro sports, it's not just for veterans minimum. They always keep a couple of super old veterans. Usually they should have already retired, but the reason you keep them there is for the culture. You don't want the young guy to come in and not have any idea how to practice, how to play. You even want a guy, by the way, sometimes the most underrated value of the veterans in sports is they were just around another great player themselves 20 years ago, and they can tell you, here's what he was like in practice. You know,
Give me Smithy as a fucking assistant manager. Just have him chilling. Just have him sitting in the back. I don't know, just filing papers, doing some mindless work that is barely costing his time. That's still going to improve morale because the team culture is thinking like, damn, we got winners here, right? We got the people, like even the guy whose job isn't directly related to my success in the team, they're still getting us the best players that we had. Like if you're surrounded by all these talented players, you're going to perform better. And that is other times the value of players like Perks and even Sven when they drop to Academy, right? It's like, what is he bringing to the table that's different? It's like, well, not very different from the other players that we had, but holy shit, has it motivated everybody to try? I don't
even know what style they play, mate. They just go garbage in half the games. So here's an interesting topic I've got for you, though. Here's a big one for you. So...
Okay.
One thing I want to ask you about was this. As usual, everyone always complains about LCS and the quality of the games. It's all terrible. Like, I saw people saying that TSM vs Cloud9 game was terrible. Like, if you actually think that game was terrible, I don't know what expectations you have for the LCS, because I actually thought that was just a very exciting game. That, listen, it had some individual ints. Like, I thought Hoodie and Perks had some pretty egregious ints. But the actual, like, play between the teams, those were comps that aren't, like, easy to use. And they were having to make split-second macro decisions against each other. Like, in some ways, that should be hard. Like, you know, this isn't the two LPL teams. You've got to be realistic. So I personally think the whole idea that like the games are terrible, I think they've been fairly terrible for a lot of years. I think some of them are fine. My question is this though, Crumbz, is I think the dark part about LCS for me at the moment is it's the only time in its history that it doesn't have one really good dominant team. That's the one thing you used to have back in the days. Like whether it was TSM or whether it was the double Team Liquid squads or Cloud9 with High back in the day, there was always at least one team where you could do the usual shadow box, like the infamous TSM versus Rogue thing. I mean, that was from a different era, but you know what I mean? You could take that team from LA and say, right, listen, I might think the region's bad, but you know, let's throw them in LEC. Would they be the third best? Would they be the second best? If they went to Worlds, could they go top 8? Right? I feel like this is the only year where no one's even starting those convos, because at the moment, it's not just like the league quality from top to bottom. The elite teams in the LCS, they're just sort of taking weeks to just be shit at the moment, Crumbz. It's kind of dark.
That's why I think this actually will be the beginning of the end for a lot of things in the LCS, because a lot of teams invested a lot of money, and they all have the same goals of Worlds, and not all will of course make it. And what happens when they don't make it? Rosters will get blown up, orgs will get blown up. And so because you don't have that certainty, it's pretty clear that anybody could make it in the top 3. I think even teams like Dig could come out of nowhere. If the other teams just slightly drop the ball, freaking Dig could come out with like 2 strats that the other enemy teams just haven't prepared for, and suddenly they're at Worlds. So I think that this year will end up just blowing up a lot of rosters. So even if we liked something of what we saw this time around, there's just going to be major changes no matter what, because of how unpredictable it has been. And you can feel it. The orgs are all just pretty much interchangeable in how well they're playing in the top 6. There's really not a big difference in a lot of their games, because they play to the level of their opponents half the time. So when they're up against each other, you can take off the nameplates and you can barely tell who is who if the champion pools were a little bit more flexible. So I think is it a dark time? It's about to be. I think you can see the clouds coming by. The storm hasn't arrived, but it's going to get there once the playoffs are concluded.
Go ahead.
The only thing that I would say, I can definitely see where you're coming from, where you think it's a dark time. The only thing is I think that we've already been in the dark ages for the past couple of years or so. The only good side that I could see when it comes to there being like more parity at the top of the league is just when you have something like last split where you have like a team like Cloud9 that just is able to completely stomp everybody, and then even still when they go to MSI, they meet NA's expectations just the same as always. They completely shit the bed. When you look at that as a whole, I do think that the one benefit could be that for a team like 100 Thieves that is looking strong, they at least are hopefully not getting desensitized to NA play. They're not just completely being relaxed, and they actually are having to still compete and hopefully be able to try every single game and actually put in the effort to maintain their spot at the top of the league, as opposed to a team like Cloud9 last season where they were just basically able to solo queue at the entire split. That's the only benefit I could see, though.
I will say, though, I do think EG, if there's any horse at the front of the race, it is EG. And it's because of what you mentioned from Peter Dunn. I like that there was a lot of transparency at the beginning of this roster in saying what they were going to be focusing on, doubling down on the strengths of the players. It looked in half the time, but once they figured it out, those things that they were working on have clearly shown to be their win cons now. Right, so this team is actually playing to the advantages that the players can generate on their own consistently, as multiple players can do it since they can play around multiple lanes now. And no other team has actually held true to any vision. It doesn't seem to me like any other of the top teams have attempted to go for anything more than a one-dimensional strategy. You have TSM, who has now fallen back to Power of Evil, is Control Mage. And then Huni, maybe if he has a good matchup, they'll put him on the carry, see if he can do some work in the top side. Then you've got Team Liquid. It's all Alfari. If Alfari is not winning lane and taking that advantage to just stomping from top, they're not doing anything else. If 100 Thieves doesn't have a good meta read and just have the right champions that just brute force against the opponent, they're not winning. And then you have, who else? Cloud9. Cloud9 is just Fudge right at the moment. If Fudge isn't just hard carrying these games, the rest of the team looks crazy. And so they've kept trying to experiment over and over. And now they've even fallen back on Olaf, which is a fine pick. But the fact that they are only now going back to Comfort, and they have come out in interviews and stated that part of the problem was that they were experimenting too much and not knowing what exactly would work for them, tells me it's too late for a lot of these teams. A lot of these teams, it is just way too late for them. And the only one that from start to finish has held on the same idea is EG. And I think that's why they look good. And that is the team that is at the top. But it's just not that far ahead from the others because they started so much lower.
I don't hate the roster construction generally. Like, I do think, sadly, Cloud9 and Team Liquid's rosters on paper has actually looked very good. I mean, obviously, you could never have known if Fudge would be good. So, actually, bearing in mind how good he's been, if anything, Cloud9's roster probably underperforms just like Team Liquid's does, except Team Liquid's never has the real jungler in. So, I will always add that caveat just to give them their fair due. My problem is this. If you want to change the culture and you want to, like, build elite teams, there's people in the region, like Peter Dunn is a good example, who can do it. Like, by the way, it doesn't surprise me that he comes over and immediately they find some miracle rookie who, again, like a bit like Johnson last year, like, where the fuck are these guys coming from? Like,
hang on, I found it. Before you go, that was definitely not Peter Dunn. I know exactly how that was scouted. It was Nizer.
Empire, maybe? Yes.
Empire. It was Empire.
He said on the show. So, yeah.
Empire
I'm just saying,
scouted him from years ago, apparently.
Yeah, but here's the difference, though. It doesn't surprise me that he would then be put into, as a starter, into a Peter Dunn team, though, if you look at his history of, like, being willing to do that, add in what you need. The other name as well, and this is where fans don't know anything about me or my opinions if they're TSM fans, right? I'm a huge fan of Kays, the guy who is basically the general manager now at TSM. He's someone where, as an analyst for Team Liquid, Fnatic, like, players who have played on this guy rave about this guy. Like, basically, he was like a true analyst, like in sports. Like, he was coming in with like slideshows of like tendencies of what teams are going to do, IG, etc. He would come in, he would break it all down, and he would make it super simple. And if you were a player, you understood going into a game, here's how we could win against them. Here's what they're going to do that they're strong at. Now, you might think everyone does all that. No, everyone else does this thing in League, in LCS, where they think you have to holistically coach every aspect of the game from A to Z, every single session session to prove that you're some good coach. That's terrible coaching. The guy who's the best player in the fucking AD carry position doesn't want you telling him 100 times not to flash and not to, like, this is basic level shit. What he wants to know is when I play against this specific team, they tend to do bad backs at one point in the game, so I'll watch out for that. I'll see if I can, like, they need something small they can hook onto. This guy's done an amazing job of that. The problem is, one, GM's a new job, and two, if you know anything about the off-season and the gems I've dropped on a bunch of my talk shows, he didn't get the team he wanted. This wasn't the lineup they were trying to make. They could have had a team that was like Licorice and fucking Jensen and Double Lift, and like they could have had a monster lineup with all vets, all super skilled players. By the way, imagine Sword Art working with a bunch of veterans and people who already are hungry for success and have been close internationally. They would have been fire, so I can't even blame him for that. So I'll say, believe it or not, the future for TSM isn't even terrible if this guy can sort of be given some free reign over who he signs and the right players can go to the team. So there's people there, but I just think the league in general, I think it's stuck in a really bad spot, largely because of franchising. People are still trying to figure out, what do we do with million? Do we invest them? Do we just save and keep with rookies? Can you develop players? Do we keep importing players? Do we get rid of the import rules? At the moment, it feels like everyone's lost and they're just reaching out, lashing out for anything that can change, basically, whether it makes any sense or not.
That's why the end of this year is going to blow shit up. They're going to blow it up. They're going to try something new for sure. I think that's what's going to happen. It's just there's going to be a lot more experimentation. And I think the priority in just staff, right? If Kays has had such a successful track record, then they're going to have to be looking for more people like him and trying to develop him, because you keep I keep talking about developing talent. What about the people that grow the talent? No one ever gave a shit about developing that aspect. And then suddenly it's like, we need to make sharpened steel, but we don't have factories. We never thought about somebody that needed to make factories. And so now we can't actually have the product that we were actually looking for. So I think they'll slowly come back to it. The question is it too late? I think that's the thing. Is it too late? And how long will it take to actually focus and give a dedicated effort on the development of the infrastructure of these organizations to actually yield results that will simultaneously elevate the league and be cost effective while competing internationally and not undergoing some damage to viewership during a reconstruction?
I've got a topic we could maybe flex to now. It'll be an interesting one. So I did an episode of The Crackdown. It was actually yesterday at the time of this recording, but obviously it'll be like a day or two and pass when this VOD comes out, where basically we had Abidage from 100 Thieves on. And one thing he said was that he made a comment that initially sounded shocking, but then he sort of when he explained it, it wasn't quite as he said it. He basically implied the reason he wasn't actually as good in past years is that he just said he was lazy. But what he meant by that wasn't like he doesn't play the game, he doesn't play solo queue. It wasn't that. What he meant was he didn't sort of actively attempt in practice to constantly be trying to improve with purpose and get to the highest possible level he could. He just sort of practiced a bit and practiced with the team and practiced as much as everyone else, but just left it at that. And if he was good, he was good. If he was bad, he's bad. So what he basically implied was now is when he's looking into I'll use words he didn't use, but, now he's sort of watching what Rookie does in the LPL or Knight. Or, the idea is now he's really going to the nth degree of trying to find every little edge to get better. And as a result, you can see his games responded in Schalke and now in 100 Thieves. Now, the reason I bring this up, Crumbz, is this is one of those areas where when fans on Reddit talk about how much players get paid or the idea that they're professional Thorin, so I'm sure they know better than you how to practice. It's I don't think fans to this day know how far League of Legends professional players in the West are from sportsmen. The amount of them that don't do things, if people, they would be shocked, Crumbz, if I told them how many junglers never watch a pro view of a Chinese jungler or never bother looking at the matchups in top lane between the two best top laners in Korean solo queue. They wouldn't even waste their time doing that, Crumbz. They go and they play solo queue or they watch half a VOD or, they just think a little bit themselves. A lot of top pros, they aren't putting in extra, they're not doing Kobe Bryant shit, put it that way.
I think part of it comes from the way that you actually enter, and you can enter in pro play. And I'm speaking from experience in that I became a pro player just from essentially escaping my life by playing a game. I was not wanting to do certain things in school, and then I could just play games instead. And then I'm not dedicating myself to playing this game and improving in every area possible. I'm just playing the game because I want to be doing that and not something else. And this is not a rare story. And then suddenly I just played the game more than anything else that I was doing. And if I have a natural talent towards an inclination towards puzzle solving or just games in general, suddenly I'm really good. And then now I'm getting offers like, oh, I guess I could do this. And then you just keep grinding and grinding and grinding, and you can just grind your way to some sort of success, right? You can grind the unpolished, the rough diamond, and you're not gonna get a beautifully crafted structure that's gonna make everything, but you're gonna get something shiny. And so that can happen for a lot of these players. And then only then, when they get picked up, and then it is required of them, or they're in a position where they value where they're at and they'd actually like to continue to do this, then do they realize, oh, I actually need to try. I actually need to now think about how to improve. And then that's the problem, that a lot of these players have arrived at the level of professional player while not being a professional. And so they discover how to be a professional during that time. And if it takes too long, they'll be gone, and they won't have a shot to get back in.
Thoughts, Oddball?
What was with Abadage? What did he mention? What made him change his mind regarding his?
I can't remember.
It's that money.
I can't remember what it was, mate.
Yeah, I would say that it's just heavily dependent on the culture for the most part. As we mentioned earlier, you have lots of players coming over to North America that are completely unmotivated, which can obviously be a drag on the other people in the team. So I would say for the most part, it just depends on the culture, the upbringing that you're brought into. And if you obviously have a team with teammates that are heavily motivated as well, that makes it a lot easier. There are obviously some examples of people that are able to just do it on their own and don't need any sort of outside influence. But I think it's way easier for a region if you just have it where everybody has the same motivation and all want to improve progressively.
I actually think it's also a problem of the age of pro players. They're too young. We have the same problem actually in Counter-Strike, and I'm going to give people even who follow Counter-Strike, this might blow their mind, by the way, this duel I'm about to drop. So a guy who was a former pro who works in the industry part of Counter-Strike is a guy formerly called Lurpis. He's called Tommy now, and he's a Finnish guy who works for basically Immortals Gaming Club, which is MIBR in CSGO, but they were like Immortals basically in League of Legends. Now this guy, he famously said in CSGO years and years ago, when the game had only been out a couple of years, there became a meta within the game where you had very powerful pistol weapons, which are the cheap guns, and basically teams would force buy those guns and have two people with pistols, two with another good gun, and one with a Desert Eagle or something, and you would just try and essentially, even though you're economically limited compared to your opponent, you just trust that these guns are pretty strong, so if I have super skilled players, I can sort of break the matrix, as it were, and just force my way back into the game, even though technically in Counter-Strike, normally what you should do is just save with pistols there, and then you have proper money for a gun next round. It's essentially the equivalent of, I give up this round, I'll go to the next one, sort of. Right? One of the reasons why he said, even though at the moment that economically in the game actually does make sense, he said, even when it no longer makes sense, pro players will still do the force buy of the worst weapons because they want to have fun and not have boring rounds in the game. Now, you might think as a fan, there's no way thought, they're professionals, they're there to win. No, it's true. Literally, even in times, because funnily enough, the team that was the best at it, the French team, then had a year where when that wasn't the meta, they just kept doing it anyway. And they lost loads of games by just basically economically crippling themselves. And the reason they did it was exactly that. They didn't want to have boring moments in the game. So even a pro, on some level, needed something fun to be happening to hook him into the game, to keep him interested. Now, the reason I bring that up is because I always say this, right? The best example I always give this for is when a fan talks about a pro player's working hours, right? You know, when they go, that's nothing. I play the game 6 hours. Now you play the game, motherfucker. He supposedly practices the game. And if you don't know the distinction between the two, you'll never know what it's like to be pro. Because the problem I have is this. I think the same scenario happens with an LCS pro and an LCK pro. He hears, oh, they practice 12 hours a day. Listen, motherfucker, you might practice 2 hours a day. I've heard some of the stories. When I hear these stories, Crumbz, about, as you say about scrims, oh, well, we were all demotivated because we had, a losing record in scrims. What are you talking about? So you now have to have fun in the practice games as well. You have to win enough practice games games to give you personal satisfaction. Otherwise, you don't learn and improve. What on earth is that? Like, in some of these Korean teams, like, people have heard the stories. If you go to Worlds in a boot camp, there's a team every year from the West who has a story that goes like this. Yeah, I lost 15 out of 16 games I played against this one Korean team. Now, in that scenario, right, they'll be like, I didn't learn anything. It's like, you don't know how to learn then, mate. That's the best gift you could ever have been given. Imagine having 15 out of 16 games where enough things go wrong that you lose the game. That's like they're just pointing in massive neon signs at all your problems if you're willing to have the eyes to see.
You must have paid that Korean team to stay with you for 16 games after losing 15.
How polite are they? I know, exactly.
Like, they know the value they're offering you.
True.
And that they're getting jack shit in return. So I think that, yeah, a lot of these teams, you know, I remember in LCK when we played over, I think it only took us one day of scrims against one team, and then immediately they demoted us. They did not allow us to scrim against them. They gave us their academy team. It's like, you need to like 3-0 them a bunch before we actually want to play with you again.
Of course.
So yeah, that's a huge value add that a lot of the teams don't have. And I think that the intense practice is also a big difference, because when you have your KPIs, for lack of a better word, and just what you need to be doing inside the game, then you actually should be gaining satisfaction from that. I don't think that the whole, like, yeah, you can have fun within a game, but as a pro player, your fun is kind of already assumed. That's why you're there. That's why you played in the first place. That you were getting satisfaction from the competition, from the winning that you're supposed to be doing, from the improvement that you have, from the camaraderie with your teammates. Like, I think the environment should be one that fosters enjoyment for the people that want to be there. If you don't want to be there, it's not going to be fun, and rolling in a game isn't going to solve that. It's going to be a temporary band-aid.
Have you ever noticed also how when it comes to a lot of top teams in North America as well as Europe, you could also argue, they always give the argument that, the reason we're behind is like we're not able to get as much practice against like good teams. We're just so good and so much better than everybody. Then as soon as they go over to some place where they actually, are like get completely shit on, then they start complaining about that.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
I mean that's just the merry-go-round of excuses. So it's nothing new.
That just shows that, like the old saying, isn't it? Like, a winner finds a way, a loser finds an excuse. That's what they do, yeah. No, the joke of those people, by the way, Oddball, is, as you pointed out there, they would have an excuse no matter what. Like, for example, right, let's say they literally did every year get to go for a boot camp in Korea, like right before their playoffs. Then it'd just be like, yeah, but we're not here the whole year. It's like, you can't win with people like that. But the point is, like, someone who actually is a winner just looks at whatever their circumstances are and goes, how do I win from this situation? Someone who doesn't really want to put in the work goes, as you'll hear from a lot of LCS players, well, it's not perfect, so why should I try? It's like, well, listen, that's not even the question, is it? Go on.
A place where I really learned this lesson that I think players would, and they would never sign up for this, but I think they would really do so well from learning. If you go actual wilderness camping, like I'm talking, you need to be chopping wood or you're going to freeze. You need to be looking for food or you're going to starve. You need to be taking care of the little tent that you're in or it'll fall down and you won't have shelter. Be in a position where your actual livelihood depends on you doing something, and see how quickly you can come up with an excuse, because the excuse literally kills you. Right? When you get to the point where an excuse is literal death, you will be finding an answer. And then you'll take that back to life. And then you'll realize, these excuses are actually coming from a place that is eventually just going to kill me.
So Crumbz is working on some sort of fucked up hybrid between Proving Grounds, Survivor, and the movie like 128 Days or whatever the fuck that.
He said there needed to be more experimentation.
Okay.
I think, man, get these players out there, get them out, get them to try
Send
what
them to
it's like
purgatory.
beyond the screen. That's what we'll call it.
I mean, whoever survives, listen, they can probably handle playing 3 scrim blocks. I'll give them that, Maybe we can merge the two together. The first topic can merge with this one, maybe.
They'll do it like right. You gotta do well in the scrims, or you don't eat. plain and simple. That's actually how it was back in the day, right? You didn't have food. You didn't make any money from playing League. So you actually needed to win your go for lol to eat lunch that day. So it's not like it didn't start or it was close to that. And there's a lot of players in tournaments that are local that are still living lives that depend on their own success to win. I remember a story, I think Raynad was telling me, Temple Raynad, from a guy in India that went to compete in a Hearthstone tournament for him, that would have to go to sneak to a internet cafe to not only be able to play this, but then he couldn't even afford the train ticket, so he had to sneak into the train to play inside the to be inside the bathroom to make it on this train all the way to the city and then play there. And he won, right? Won the whole thing just from this guy's grit and dedication to try to make it. So I think that a big aspect that I think is lacking in League that might have actually been hurt by franchising is that there is never a moving away from something. There is only move towards winning, move towards worlds, success, whatever you want to call it. There is never the fire that is telling you need to move away from this as well. So there isn't two things pushing someone forward. There is simply one that is optional. It's an option. You don't even have to stay competing. And so I think that's something that's really hurt it. And I don't know how you can revive it without franchising. Other leagues have the motions, like the football leagues, but I think it's really important that people have those two aspects to move towards something, not only something to strive for, but something to avoid.
One thing I'll also throw in there as well is another way as an individual team you actually can somewhat short circuit these problems and counteract the issues is you can select for different qualities than you currently do. Like how about instead of signing the mid laner because he's really sick on a Kali or a Zir, why not sign someone who's good at the game and you already know from past references or maybe even working with them that they have like a killer mindset, like a super sick work ethic, or they work really well with it. Like people have to start selecting for other things as well. If you acknowledge as a general scene-wide issue, then pick the rare players who are the Kobe Bryant motherfucker who's put in the extra time and is killing themselves. Like, you hear the stories of people like that, but they tend to just be fluff pieces. It doesn't sound like people currently actually factor it in, because they do that silly thing where they, like, if you notice, the worst people ever for fucking talking about how good or bad their actual players are is publicly the coaches and the GMs. They just talk like every player they ever signed was a nice guy who had a great personality, amazing work ethic, heart of gold, always like, come on, man. It's like, this is just implausible. Like, either you're an idiot and a liar, or you have the worst fucking eye test of all time for these things. Like, it can't be true. These things are rare on the ground. It's the same reason why I always roll my eyes on talk shows when pro players tell me that all of them are shot callers and they all know at all times in the game what to do and they're making every decision democratically. It's like, well, I'll tell you what, cocksucker, there's a reason you aren't winning the world championship, isn't there? Like, yeah, you keep going with that method and see how that works out for you. Meanwhile, I'll just do what I would have done the whole time, which is when everyone kept telling me that shot callers don't exist, I would ensure that my team did have Mythian perks on it. And, you know, I'll build out from that, no matter how good those players are. So I think there's another way we can sort of like short term get some of these players in the right teams.
You know, that's an aspect of coaches that I never understood and I thought should be done a different way. Because what is the downside of you praising your player in public? I don't understand that. Like, you're not revealing anything. Besides, you're not even good enough to reveal something that matters.
True.
In the second place, if you reveal something, you're in the poker scenario where the enemy team now has to consider, are you revealing something because you want them to know this and you're trying to take this information? So they should fuck off and not try to include this information in the first place to your strategy. So why can't you just say, you know what, this guy is sick. This guy is doing this for us. He's having a great time. And now you're not only increasing this player's value, if he is to be traded, you're not only now helping this player's morale because he's like, damn, my coach is sticking out for me right now, feeling good. The whole team feels better. And now you're encouraging the player. I just think that managers and coaches could be doing such a better job in just being open about the things that they're doing, because they're not gaining anything from secrecy. It's not nuclear codes. You're not gaining anything from this. Like, half the time, even if you were to say, yeah, our champion pool is this, if you list all the champions in the game, like just like, I don't know, the 30 picks that a player could play, what is the other person gaining? Like, what are they legitimately gaining from that when you can always just change it? Right? If you know what you're doing, you don't actually lose from pumping out information, man. I would love to be in a coaching position and just constantly be like, yeah, we're only going to be playing these champions, and then just not doing it.
Just mind game them. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just having fun the whole time. As a coaching, as a team, you'd be fucking messing with people's heads all the time. Be like, oh yeah, for playoffs, Jizuke is only gonna play Rise and maybe LeBlanc. That's about it. Oh, and Ziggs too. Question mark. Okay, great. You now have thrown a curveball that could mess up with the opponent. You're taking every opportunity you can to increase your chance of success.
Do you think the reason for this is a decision based off the coaches or higher management?
I think they just don't care. I don't think they think this is an important aspect of the game. And I think that they are also, for the most part, not very skilled at speaking publicly. And so they'd rather just focus on the game and not do that. And a lot of coaches, I think, because they are in a more analytical, and if you want to think about it this way, a more serious role, they don't want to almost take up the mantle of showboating in a way. And so it feels like it's a different aspect of their game that doesn't necessarily translate. But in my
Wisetown, Zachary Carter, Zack Schmidt, Adam Ochs, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Kris, Dean Tanglis, Doomseer, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, Bot Pounder 420, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or guests to come on my shows? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those video AMAs where I might even insult you in a funny or maybe obnoxious manner? Do you want teasers for my upcoming content, things I'm thinking of, what I might be changing? Do you want to take part in one of those long discussions where we go all over the place with the big donators? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is using the Patreon link in the description box below to join the Screwluminati today.